The Novelist as Teacher is a very important essay by Chinua Achebe, who is, of course, famous, justly famous, for his epic novel Things Fall Apart. However, many people ignore or are not aware of this very important text, The Novelist as Teacher, where he makes his agenda and choices clear. He contends it is quite before the official beginning of post-colonialism, by the way. Achebe contends that the role of a writer in European society cannot be compared to that in the African society. Since these societies have been long the victims of colonization, the writers from these societies have a duty to speak to their people as well as by implication to the world about the greatness of their past culture. He states that in the European world generally, the artist or the writer is thought to be as an avant-garde, advance-garde, who is mostly against society. Society is suspicious of him. At the same time, society enjoys the kind of changes, transformations that this person brings to bear on them. D.H. Lawrence could be an example, T.S. Eliot, or even James Joyce. We see when we read the portrait of the artist as a young man, a very interesting text, how Joyce was, or the narrator in that thing, was very unhappy with the culture of Ireland, which he wanted to transcend. So these are the European models of writer or intellectual or novelist which Achebe disagrees with. He says that his single most important agenda is to prove to his own people that African society was not a long night of darkness from which the Christian missionaries absolved them. He brings an example to this essay. His wife was teaching in a school. There a boy was asked to write about an African weather, harmattan, which he did not write but wrote about an European weather, winter. So why it was asked, the boy was writing about the winter, named it winter when what was meant was harmattan. The boy said that he does not want to be thought as a bushman by his peers. So whatever is indigenous, whatever is native to African society, we can say the same thing holds good for India also, was seen with a great deal of suspicion and a great deal of resentment by people who became colonized. In Africa, it was more than India probably because a lot more people got converted and they tried more painstakingly to imbibe the European ways of life into themselves. At one point of time, Achebe shows how their cottage industry of pottery suffered a lot in that essay when people stopped taking those pitchers made of clay to carry water and was using tins of whatever kind just to Europeanize themselves. These are the subtle ways in which colonialism functioned to strike at the very basis of the colonized society's economy and culture. Here, I think Gandhi becomes very important in the Indian context. His Hind Swaraj and his movement for Swadeshi clothes, he could understand this dual attack of colonialism in economy as well as culture. So, in the novelist as a teacher, that particular essay, Achebe makes it very clear that an African writer or an African novelist has to speak for African society, not against African society. So, if we haven't read this essay, our understanding of Things Fall Apart remains incomplete. That is what I tell my students. Generally, when we read Things Fall Apart, there are certain uncomfortable parts, uncomfortable for us, which we generally think to uh, think that Achebe is representing here the bad sides of the African culture. That is far from his intention actually. So the murder of Ikemefuna in Things Fall Apart is a case in point. He was not showing that homicide or something was bad from Eurocentric point of view. He was just stating the thing. Yes, the only criticism of the murder of Ikemefuna can be the fact that the oracle of the village had asked Okonko not to commit the murder, but Okonko did it. So it is more of an internal critique, if any, of African society, not based on the Eurocentric models of thought. So that's why the novelist as a teacher becomes a very significant text in negotiating the difference and expected roles in terms of difference in terms of expected roles of artists in the colonized societies from that of the artists in colonizing societies. We may think about the writers like Salman Rushdie, V.S. Naipaul, or even Arundhati Roy, and try to examine whether they fulfill this desire that has been expressed by Achebe. African writers mostly do, but writers of Indian origin, there is some doubt, so that you can explore for yourselves. So please keep this in mind, the trope of novelist as teacher. It is not exactly going back to literature enforcing morality kind of thing, but this has come from the colonial consciousness because of the damages and harms done by colonialism in undermining the indigenous culture. Achebe feels that the writer should take up this task of representing or presenting his society in a better way to the outer world. He ends with reference to Sartre's advocacy of racism to counter racism. Racism in itself is bad, but to counter racism, it may be necessary. It is like Gayatri Spivak's strategic essentialism. So he feels that Africans at time should feel that not only they are as good as the Europeans, but in fact they are better. In this point, I am reminded of Swami Vivekananda, who always try to hammer hard on this point that Indians must regain their faith in themselves, that they can do anything, they're as good as Europeans or Americans. So, in this regard, Achebe's role is very similar to Vivekananda too. In fact, Achebe, Vivekananda, Gandhi, Tagore, Gugi wa Thiong'o, all these are, also products of the colonial continuum. I will request each of you to read this essay. You will find it easily on the internet. Very short essay, The Novelist as Teacher, and I'm sure you will be enriched in your perception about the writer, even if you don't follow him or don't agree with him fully. Thank you.